I didn't mean to record this episode on the week that I'm recording it. If you're watching this live, it is going to be the week of Father's Day. Dun dun dun. Yeah, it's not funny. I mean, but it is a little funny. If you know me, I have to like throw a little humor into things so I can get through it. That's just kind of how I deal with trauma. So this episode is Your Father Doesn't Love You, So Now What? And excuse the way that I am titling this, the title of this episode. I just came up with it a while ago when I knew I wanted to do this type of episode. I just thought that the title was like attention grabbing, like it was what is that? I don't know how to word it, but it was going to grab people's attention. Like, oh, what's that episode about? Your father doesn't love you? Interesting. It goes much more deeper than the title of this episode. But if you have any parent that you may not talk to, or you feel like no connection with, or you know somebody that is going through this, please share this episode with them just so that they can feel that they are not totally alone in this situation of having a parent that you no longer speak with or have no relationship with, or you may have like a toxic relationship with them. This is the Kristin Ann Show, New York licensed social worker and board certified life coach. I just want to help you explore different ways to think. Thanks so much for tuning in. So on this episode, we're going to talk about my experience with this, about my relationship with my dad, and how I coped with it, and some things that maybe you can take away from how I've dealt with it, and maybe it can help you or somebody that you know. So let's go all the way back when I was young, baby. My father was, from what I understand, because I don't remember, I think when I was younger, he was the greatest father ever. And he would give us anything that we wanted, buy us anything that we wanted, and just he was emotionally there. So it wasn't just the material things, but it also was that he just was emotionally there for us as well. What we really didn't know until more recently, or not more recently, but when we got older, was that, and this was more like us asking my mom about like information about him, was that when they had my sisters and I, my mother kind of faded into the background. And now being an adult and now being married, I can only imagine how this felt for my mother. Being in a relationship with somebody that you just had a child with, 2 children, 3 children, and no longer receiving the love that you received when there was no children involved. So what changed? He became more controlling, more judgmental. He would criticize everything that she would do with us. So it was always just so interesting of that dynamic. And now, like I said, now that I'm older and soon to have kids, I can only imagine having a partner that decides to like kind of like ignore you. And I'm not talking about like completely ignore. I'm talking about like I said, being extremely judgmental, criticizing, and not being a good emotional partner that you would need when you have kids. Getting older, it was always very hard for me to accept the fact of how he was versus how he is in the present moment. So long story short, and I think I've explained the story multiple times on a different episode, and I am not even sure which one it was. But I did explain, long story short, when maybe this was maybe over a year, maybe hitting 2 years, maybe a year and a half, when I got a phone call from my sisters saying that my dad was having a heart attack and he had to go to the hospital. He was not having a heart attack. He was having a panic attack and he was in the psych ER. So, I mean, obviously this is just buildup of trauma that he never, ever addressed, like extreme trauma he'd never addressed, and would always just push it to the side and not really pay attention to it. But it was my experience when I got that call that I immediately had a terrible stomach ache. So after that, for a year, I would experience terrible stomach aches getting into a car. And you can only imagine the struggle with that because you have to get in a car almost every single day. I mean, I know I do. And that was a struggle. And it just kind of trickled down to like other things that I was having anxiety with. So it came to a point, and even before this whole situation, I'm actually going to go even back further. Maybe, and I actually do remember this very clearly. I think it was, I'm going to say maybe 2 to 3 years ago when I was on the phone with him, and I forgot the conversation, but I just remember the feeling that I got. The feeling that I got was, I'm never going to get what I need from him, ever. Now, or maybe even the future, but I have to stay in the present moment now. And I remember thinking to myself, wow, this is really sad. This is so sad that I will never have the relationship that I yearn to have with him because it's just not existent. And I keep on going back to how he was when I was younger. And that wasn't the way that I could operate anymore. I had to think about what was happening in the present moment. And the present moment was he was not mentally stable and even unable to have a relationship with me that I knew that I needed and I deserved. And I remember that I was in the city, I was in a cab going to work. And I remember just being like, fuck, okay. And I knew that I always had that feeling like, oh, this is just not going to work, but let me try one more time. Let me try one more time. And it's always good to never give up, right? Like with anything in your life. But if it's something when it comes to regards to a toxic relationship in your life, I really want you to take a step back and really think about this, especially anybody that's going through what I'm going through at all or have experienced a relationship with the parent. You have to really think about what is happening in the present moment, and is this something that you actually want to have in your life? And another question I want to ask you guys is this relationship, can you repair it? Or is it something that you have to walk away from? So I had that conversation with myself over and over and over again, and I would try and I would try and I would try. I would talk to him and tell him how I would feel, and it just would never work out. So I want you to ask yourself, is this a relationship that I can repair? Can I go back to this parent and say, hey, I'm actually feeling this way and you're making me feel this way? Is this something that we can work on? So you have to understand, and which I'm sure that you do, that if you're giving 50% and the other person's not giving any percentage at all, or maybe just like 5%, it's not going to work out because you're going to always be disappointed. If the other person says, you know what, I want to work with with you, and they show you and you can tell that they're actually trying, then that's something different. For me, I was working on something that I was giving like 100 and he was giving like 20%. And that just didn't feel right for me at all. And that wasn't really fair. And I was just so stuck on the whole feeling of like parent relationships that, you make a choice to have a child, right? And this is why people ask me, when are you going to have kids? I'm like, I'm going to do it when I feel like I'm ready emotionally to have a fucking child. Because when you have a child, you have a responsibility now for the rest of your life to love and care for that child. You do. And for me, that's why I'm just going to wait for a little bit and just take my time. Because I want to be able to say that I gave my all and I was 100% like, not 100% ready, because I don't think anybody is 100% ready, but just to know that I know what I'm taking on. I know I'm going to have children, and I have to take on the responsibility of loving and caring for them. And it is very hard when you have a parent that just like doesn't work for it, and you're like, but you made the decision of having kids. And me and my sisters, we're not so bad. We're not so bad. You made a decision to have children, and you have to like have that for the rest of your life and take care of your kids. So that was always very hard. Like, okay, so you decided to have kids, and now you're like, ooh, it's just not working for me anymore. This is just not working anymore. So listen, if anybody's giving you some shit to have kids and you want to take your time, this is your permission that it's okay, however old you are, to take your time. That's it. That's all I wanted to say about that. The question again that I want to ask is, when do you actually fix the relationship, or when do you walk away? So there's key stuff that I want you to just be more aware of if you're not. See if you're putting more effort in than the parent is. See if you're really communicating to them what you really are feeling, because communication is key. You need to let them know, like, I'm really feeling this when you do that, you know, and maybe they'll be like, oh my God, I didn't realize I was doing that. I'm so sorry. You always just want to make sure that the other person's willing to put in the effort just like you are. And I think that we all, just like myself, put in so much emphasis of what a parent should be versus what is actually happening in your life. So, like I said before, I was stuck on the fact that my father was a great father when I was younger. I could not accept the fact of what was happening in the present moment. And it was very hard. I recently just got married, maybe not maybe, a couple months ago, 6 months ago. And that was very hard. Just changing around different things, that your mindset, your beliefs about how things should be versus what they are. Like a father-daughter dance when you get married. I know it sounds just so like, oh really, Kristin? Like, you're gonna talk about that? Like, it was very difficult to not have him there present in the day. But I did think to myself, okay, well, if I actually had him here, my anxiety would go through the roof, that I would not be able to show up. So I had to make a decision that that probably wasn't the best interest, because I actually had to show up. It was my wedding. And I wanted to enjoy that day. And I knew that that would not be the time or the place. And it may not ever be the time or the place for him and I. And just know, if you're going through this, something that I'm going through, whether that be a mom or a dad, stepdad, step parent, foster parent, whoever whoever took care of you or takes care of you. If you're experiencing the same things that I have experienced with my dad, and you're wondering, is this always going to hurt? The answer is, it might hurt, but it may not be every single day, every single minute. For me, I still get very upset about the relationship that I have with my dad currently. And it's like grief, right? Even though my father is not dead, he's still very much alive. It's grieving that relationship that you once had, or that you long to have. And yeah, I would say that it's part of like grief, if you want to call it that. I think that it's definitely appropriate to say that it's grief, because I am grieving the loss of something that I used to have, and I don't longer have it anymore. Yes, he's physically here on earth, but I'm grieving the idea of a dad, and honestly, it sucks. So don't ever put a timeline in your mind of, okay, how long should I be feeling this way? It's however long it takes you to accept the fact of what's happening in your life right now. And again, it's always going to be very, very hard. You might be coming on this podcast, like listening, like, okay, Kristin, like, you're talking about your experience. Like, what can I do? What can I do to feel better? And maybe it's just accepting the fact that sometimes you're not going to feel better all the time in regards to the situation. And I think a couple of things, that if I can leave you with a couple of things, it would be acceptance, and it would be forgiveness. Now, it's not totally accepting what they have done if you forgive them. And it's not like you have to actually go to them and say, hey, I forgive you. Or again, forgiving somebody doesn't mean that you're accepting what had happened with them. But it's also just allowing yourself to be, because forgiving is for you and it's not for them. I know when some of the days that pass, and I feel more of a state in forgiveness, and like, okay, I know that he has the inability to give me what I need. So it is what it is. And we just don't have a relationship. And I forgive him for X, Y, and Z. I know when I come from that state of mind that I feel much more at peace versus the anger, the hate. And I'm sure you hear this all the time, everywhere, maybe on social media, wherever you listen to stuff, wherever you consume stuff. That hate is the most toxic thing that you could have in your body. And I 1000% do believe like hate, like, and just being angry all the time, being so negative, it's just the cause of so many different things that can happen within your body. I am not an expert in any of this, but I know that I've listened to like a lot of people who are experts in this, that there is such a link of like how you feel and how you act and how you portray yourself in the world versus like how you feel inside and how your body feels. So I hope when you listen to this that you take a little nugget of what I'm saying and just accept the fact of where you are in the relationship with that specific person. And maybe, just maybe, things can get better, or it's just more accepting the fact of where your relationship is with that person. The last thing that I'm going to say is, if you can, to try not to tie your self-worth to this person and the relationship that you have with them. For example, I tied my self-worth to my dad. Like, well, if your dad doesn't love you, who the fuck is going to love you? Well, I married a wonderful, wonderful man. Been married for 6 months. You know, I'm not sitting here that we're saying that I've been married for 20 years and it's been blissful. No, 6 months. I married the person that I always knew that I deserved and that I wanted. And for a while, and still sometimes to this day, I always tie my self-worth to that relationship of, well, if my own dad is not going to love me, like what else can I do in this world? So if you're thinking like that, I want to let you know that the relationship that you have with this person has nothing to do with the person that you are inside. You are an amazing person. You are strong. You can fucking do anything that you want to do in this life. Just try. And I know it might be hard for me to tell you, try. Just try not to tie your self-worth up into this relationship, especially if it's toxic. Especially if you know that you've tried on your end and there's really nothing else that you can feel like that you can do anymore. It's okay. It's okay. So this is your permission slip to do whatever you feel like is right for you. And that's all that you can do. So happy Father's Day, Dad. Thanks so much for tuning in, guys, on this episode of, well, your father doesn't love you, so now what? Bye, guys. Thanks so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed the episode, please like, share, follow on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and SoundCloud. Also, come follow me on Instagram, _Kristin_Ann88. And if you're ready to take the next step because you fucking deserve it, come take a look at my website on Instagram,